Perfect. Okay. Okay, so you're going to click for me, right, Helen? Okay, so you can click to my slides in the beginning. Thank you. So good morning, everybody. I hope you're all doing well today. I know some schools have started last week, this week, yesterday, a lot of phone calls. But before I begin, I want to let you know, we know we're here today to talk about compensatory services. I shared with Kristen and everybody else that was on prior to the meeting that I just came off of doing a CPSC meeting for compensatory services for a family. And I have to tell you, I wasn't sure walking into that meeting, or shall I say walking in, doing a Zoom, how it was going to be, but it was a phenomenal, productive meeting. All parties working together for the best interests of the child. And we focused on what this little guy needed the most. So with that said, going forward, I want you to think about that. It was a phenomenal meeting, and it's where we focused on what this little boy needed as compensatory services, where he regressed, and he regressed across all avenues, but we had to put the focus on a specific area of his disability. So with that said, I'm going to begin. I've written up kind of a background on some of the things that we're going to slide into Kristen's presentation as well as Aaron's presentation. So I'm giving a lot of the background stuff here. So I'd like to start off by saying it's amazing how our lives have changed over the past several months. Many of us have found ourselves not only working from home, but balancing that with keeping our children engaged in distance learning. You can click. When we planned this presentation, I knew it would be a very challenging topic to take on due to the emotional impact that all parents are having regarding their children regressing during COVID-19 and the challenges of receiving services by way of distance learning. I think we can all agree that when it comes to planning for our children going back to school this year, we know a lot, but what we do know changes every day or every week. Even though we are all living in the same pandemic world right now, we are all in different places and we have different needs. It's obvious that there's not a one-size-fits-all solution to this problem. As parents of children with special needs or disabilities, this is not a new concept to us. We are not new to the world of assessing and advocating for what our children need. We are used to reminding the schools that the goal is to create an academic program that works for our children, not to create a child that works for the program. In our current pandemic world, our educators, policymakers are struggling to figure out a model that will work for all of our children. There are so many variables at play here. It's overwhelming to parents, administrators, educators, and providers. I would like to take a moment to read to you some of the comments that I've received from families. My work underneath Parent to Parent is dealing with families in 11 counties, and it's over 115 school districts. So since this pandemic has begun, I have been talking to parents constantly. So these are just a few of their comments, and I really think they're important that you all hear them. We are stressed, overwhelmed, and angry. Overwhelmed because distance learning doesn't work for everybody, and we feel like our children have been abandoned. Parents have noticed their children regressing since school moved to remote learning. My child is regressing in many different areas of academics and related services, speech, PT, and OT. My child has missed half of the 2019-2020 school year because my child doesn't receive services. There is no data even being collected. It's extremely discouraging to see progress reports sent home during the quarantine that specifically states districts are having to rely mostly on data before the time frame that school closed. Managing my child's behaviors due to not receiving services and the emotional impact of the pandemic. I cry every day watching my child regress right in front of me, and I don't know how to stop it. Depending on the day, parents are feeling angry, frustrated, hopeless, or sometimes even paralyzed. So what I would like to do now is take this time to remind you of what we know and the tools you have to advocate for your child. In March 2020, schools across the country closed in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and quickly started to develop distance learning plans to provide education services for all students. Access to the education curriculum changed for all students, and schools were required to provide special education and related services to the greatest extent possible. Families were trying to figure out what comes next, and they felt they had to figure out where the school left off. Parents became their child's teachers, therapists, all while trying to balance their day-to-day responsibilities at home and with their jobs. When school closed, special education administrators feared they would be swamped with lawsuits if they couldn't offer a comparable education for all students, including those with disabilities. Some districts were even initially reluctant to offer any online learning. The pandemic suspended many IEPs, the legal document that outlines what services students with disabilities will receive, making them impractical. Many IEPs require therapy and other supports that simply could not be provided, at least effectively, during distance learning. So if the district is providing online services to the general population, our children must be provided with special education and related services online, virtually, or by telephone. However, the U.S. Department of Education has made it clear that ensuring compliance with IDEA should not prevent any school from offering educational programs through distance instruction. In its guidance, the Department of Education required that schools must provide each student with a disability the special education and related services identified in the student's IEP, again, to the greatest extent possible. And the department recognizes that there may be exceptional circumstances that could affect how a particular service is provided. So what does all this mean? Your child is entitled to at least the same options as the general education population, but also the provisions of FAPE, free appropriate public education, meaning that your child should have all parts of his or her IEP provided to the greatest extent possible. This language suggests that the district has some wiggle room. Unlike normal situations, when a written agreed to IEP component must be provided unless you agree otherwise. Here, both the crisis itself and DOH guidance establishes flexibility. For now, there is no absolute right to any agreed upon IEP. But keep in mind that IDEA allows for flexibility in determining how to meet the individual needs of a student. So if your child was provided with substituted services, say speech therapy services over Zoom rather than in person, the IEP team may decide that compensatory services may or may not be required. It's how you're all going to work on it together. CPSE, CSE principals, educators, parents, and legal guardians all play an important role in the IEP process. It's all about doing things in such a way as to serve the best interest of the child that will lead to better outcomes, and it's also less adversarial. I do not think people are interested in suing each other. There's more of a focus on making sure our kids get something. We need to work together during this crisis to resolve any disputes or any issues so that we're not spending our time and our money working on litigation. What we know is that learning loss during COVID-19 may not have resulted from anything that districts have done wrong. I don't think parents should be okay with their children receiving a lack of quality services, but there might be some services that their children were receiving in February that are going to be difficult to deliver right now during COVID-19. But we're in for a rough opening if funding doesn't come through. If we don't get the money for additional services, the kids are going to need the cleaning equipment, the special busing that'll need to take place. I don't see how an effective reopening can happen or for how long. Without federal funding, it could inflame the situation. It could pit the local school districts and state education department against parents, advocates, and that's not what we need right now. Once school resumes, which it has, the IEP teams should determine whether the child is entitled to compensatory services for the time that the child did not receive an adequate education to make up for any skills that may have been lost or not advanced during the school closure. While the circumstances for every school district and student is vastly different, one thing holds true across our state and from every level of the education system. We must work together to ensure all individual education program teams have structures in place for reviewing individual students' needs and providing special education and related services at the start of the new school year. It's very unlikely that IEP services will look exactly as they looked a year ago. Even as schools are returning both in person and remotely, it's going to be a hugely different school experience for all of our kids. And with that said, I think that kind of lays the foundation for Kristen, because we're talking about compensatory services. We really need to work together as teams to figure out how we can support the needs of our children. So thank you.
Thanks, Tina. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to talk about compensatory education basics. So kind of the 101 of the law on the topic. This includes information on some federal laws as well as the applicable New York state laws. By attending the presentation, you are not becoming a client of my organization, the Legal Aid Society, and this does not constitute legal advice. If you feel like you need legal advice, you should, in fact, reach out to an attorney and seek some professional help interpreting and applying the law to your particular circumstances. That being said, at the end, we will be addressing questions, but again, please be very careful about what personal information you put in your questions, and I will not be providing legal advice to specific legal questions. Okay, so I want to start by going over some guidance that the New York State Education Department put out about what CSE teams should be considering for the 2021 school year in general. So New York State Education Department says that IEPs must be informed by considerations like whether the student qualifies for extended school year services. So this training is not covering extended school year services. There is a difference between extended school year services and summer school. So just kind of know that going into it. And extended school year services does involve the risk of substantial regression when an IEP student does not attend during the summer months. So some of what we're talking about today will in fact be relevant to a decision on extended school year services, even though we're not covering that during this presentation. Another consideration is revisions to the IEP to ensure that the child continues to receive a free, appropriate public education due to any change in the student's needs, which may have occurred due to the COVID-19 closures. And lastly, the considerations and recommendations should be looking at compensatory services. So what is compensatory education anyway? It's programs and services that are designed to meet the individual needs or circumstances of a particular child. Those programs and services need to be crafted with the goal of providing whatever educational benefits the child would have received from their special education programs and instructions had the school district been able to carry out the IEP as they had designed it or thought that it would have been implemented before the closures. New York State Education Department has put out some guidance on this, specifically in the context of COVID-19. So they have said that compensatory services are programs and services awarded to remedy or to fix a past denial of appropriate services that were not provided in order to enable the student to make appropriate progress in light of his or her circumstances. This includes loss in skills that occurred as a result of the student not receiving the education or services due to the school closures. So New York State Education Department is specifically saying that compensatory education can apply within the context of the COVID-19 closures. Compensatory services must be directly linked to the denial of educational progress and achievement, and they must be reasonably calculated to enable the student to make appropriate progress. So the point with a lot of this language is that it is going to be very individualized. It's very specific to each child's particular circumstances and is going to require a detailed analysis of what skills the child has either regressed in or did not make adequate progress in, and then looking at how specifically that can be addressed. So some examples could include extending the school day, providing extra tutoring, providing additional services during regular school hours. However, anyone looking at this should keep a very open mind about the realities and the practicalities of what you're requesting. In-person instruction in a lot of districts who are able to put students back in person are already being condensed. Erin's going to talk to you a little bit and provide some examples, at least from her district, about what the school day will look like. And so it may not be practical without removing a child from core instruction and something else to add in these services during the school day. You also have to think about, is extending the school day feasible for that child, given that child's abilities and disability. So where does the right to compensatory education even come from? The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the IDEA, requires that eligible students with disabilities are provided a free and appropriate education, public education. We call that FAPE. This is a federal law. FAPE is usually provided through an IEP that is designed to meet the individual education needs of that particular student. Compensatory education is designed to be a remedy or a fix to a loss of FAPE. So school districts were allowed some flexibility. Tina talked a little bit about that in implementing IEPs during the COVID-19 closures, because there was really no way for districts to have planned ahead of time for this. Nobody expected this to happen, and they needed the flexibility to be able to do what they had the resources to provide. However, providing FAPE still remained a requirement for districts. The other thing I want to point out when we're talking about compensatory education is that the loss of FAPE does not necessarily need to be the school district's fault. And I think it's important when we're having conversations between school districts and parents that we not focus on fault, because it's not really the point. The point is to focus on, where is the child performing? What skills have they lost? How have they regressed? How have they not made adequate progress? And how do we fix it? I think focusing on fault can just create a lot more emotion to the situation than really is necessary. So some of the factors that we could look at for loss include, like, was there a complete closure of the school, the frequency that a service was reduced, the student's inability to participate, maybe because the student, him or herself, was severely ill. Did the student's disability interfere with virtual learning or instruction? And other factors that are not directly applicable, but I think still relevant, are like the family's ability to access the internet, to access technology. Did the student have trouble using a the virtual platform? Another factor might be, was a parent an essential worker and not able to adequately supervise the virtual instruction of their child, and perhaps that is a factor in, you know, what has happened with skill progression. So when are students eligible for compensatory education? There's largely two groups, if you want to call it that, two categories of students that we talk about with compensatory education. The first are those students who have aged out of the special education system. So generally those are students who are going to be older than 21. Traditionally, we've looked at those students and said they're eligible for compensatory education when they've suffered a gross violation of the IDEA that denied or excluded the student from educational services for a substantial period of time. New York State Education Department has provided some guidance saying that essentially, because compensatory education services are a remedy to a denial of FAPE, as long as the student was entitled to FAPE during the period of time of the COVID-19 closures, he or she could be eligible for compensatory services, even though they're no longer attending their high school programming under their IEP. The second category, which is the much bigger category of students that most of us are going to be talking about, are younger students who are still enrolled with an IEP. And traditionally, their eligibility depends on the severity of the loss of FAPE, whether the IEP was reasonably calculated to enable the child to receive an educational benefit. That's still technically the standard. And so you're going to be looking at, was there a negative impact on the student's progress towards IEP or regular education goals? Were there regression of skills that had already developed, or some other deprivation of educational benefit? So are students with disabilities eligible for compensatory services merely based on the COVID-19 closures? Almost every child regressed in some way or didn't make the same progress that they would have made had they been attending full-time in-person classes. The answer to that question is maybe, but it is not an entitlement. It's not an automatic service. Districts, as students are coming back, will need to be assessing the present levels of performance for all of their students, especially their students with disabilities. They're going to be comparing those levels with where that student was before the closure, as well as where they would expect them to be had the closures not happened. This review is going to include a lot of things. It's going to include general education performance assessments. It's going to also look at all of the sections of the IEP, importantly, the goals section of the IEP. But parents and guardians can and should also be keeping track of student performance and goal progression, particularly if your students are still receiving all or part of their schooling virtually. It will be important that you be able to participate in the conversation with your school districts about your child's progress or lack of progress. NYSED has put out guidance again that CSEs are expected to continue to progress monitor as they always have been. They should be trying to adapt that progress monitoring for virtual instruction where that's needed. They should be examining the student's academic performance over time and evaluating the effectiveness of the instruction during the school closures. Similarly, the U.S. Department of Education has said that CSEs must make an individualized determination whether and to what extent compensatory services may be needed when schools are able to resume normal operations. So because this is individual and based on skill progression or regression, it is possible that a student, and very likely that a student, could qualify for compensatory education in one or two, a few areas. But compensatory education is not a blanket. So once a child is eligible for compensatory education, it doesn't mean that they get it across their entire IEP or across their entire academic curriculum. It's going to be tailored to the specific area that the child has lost skills in or not progressed in adequately. So for an example, it's possible that a student did actually fine academically during remote instruction, but maybe regressed in a physical therapy goal or regressed with a social emotional goal. So it's possible that the student is not going to receive compensatory education for the academic areas, but very well could receive them in PT or with their social emotional goal. So New York State Education Department came out with some additional factors that CSE teams and parents should be considering for the 2020-21 school year. These factors are not specific to compensatory education, but I think they're very relevant to the compensatory education conversation. So they should be considering, the teams, including parents, should be considering how long the student's school was closed. Was the student provided instruction or services through some alternate method? Were those methods beneficial for that particular student? Was the student engaged and able to access that service? Is there documentation of the amount of instruction and services that the student was provided during the closure? Have there been changes in educational progress or achievement? Are there indicators of regression of skills that were previously gained? Is there a specific skill that's been lost? Is there a possibility that the student will require extended school year services because of the regression? And did the COVID-19 closures result in any new needs for that student that the team should be considering? So the new needs are definitely not going to be considered as part of compensatory education, but still I think a relevant factor when you're looking at the broader picture of the whole child and what this child will need in order to make progress now that we're back in in-person instruction, at least in some of our districts. So you're listening to all of this and wondering, you know, you feel like maybe you have a child that you're working with, or your own child might be eligible. How do you go about this? There are two kind of broad ways that compensatory education can be considered. One is at the recommendation of the district or the CSE team itself. As I stated, districts are going to be engaging in progress monitoring. They're going to be gathering data on student performance. They may identify a student who has regressed or really not made adequate progress and can bring it forward to the parent to recommend those services. There's various staff members who will be working with the child pretty closely. So that might be a service provider, it might be the special education teacher, it might be the school psychologist, who can bring that recommendation to the CSE if they feel that the child really has regressed or not made progress. The second way, and probably more common way that the conversation gets started, is by parent or guardian request. Parents should communicate concerns that they have about their children. And first, I always recommend that you start that conversation with the special education teacher or the service provider who's providing the service that you're concerned about. There are, most children have regressed to some degree during the time that schools have been closed. And there are ways that teachers and service providers will be providing, I don't want to call it compensatory education, but they will be addressing skill regression or academic regression as part of a broader curriculum within their classrooms. And by sharing those concerns, the teachers may be able to adjust some of what they're doing in the classroom to address those concerns without needing additional pullouts or, what we would think of as more traditional compensatory education. And if the concerns are more significant than that, you should absolutely bring them to the attention of the CSE chair or director. I always recommend that those concerns be put in writing and that you be as specific as possible about what your concerns are, what areas, why. Ask that the CSE schedule a meeting so that you can sit down with them and discuss your concerns with the entire team. Be prepared with as much information as possible on your own to bring to that meeting and to bring to the CSE's attention. You may have outside documentation that is important for the CSE to consider. That could be from other specialists that your child is working with, a counselor outside of school, medical experts. It could be your own data tracking that you've done at home while your child's been on virtual instruction. And lastly, ask that the CSE send you its progress monitoring notes before the meeting so that you can be informed and you're not hearing this information for the first time at a meeting when you have a limited period of time to work through very important concerns. If you can review it ahead of time, it will just streamline the conversation and keep the conversation on task about the areas that are really of most concern for that particular child. My last slide lays out the sources and resources. So all of the New York State education guidance, the US Department of Education guidance is all linked here. And I want to specifically point out the last document, the last link, is a guide to the special education in plain language document that the Special Education Task Force produced. That contains kind of an overview of special education laws. It provides some sample letters. It's just a really good resource for parents and other advocates. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Erin Hill, and she's going to talk with us a little bit about the kind of practicalities of returning to school and how districts are going to be monitoring our children as the new school year kicks off.
All right, thank you, Kristen. Welcome back to school, everybody. This is what we've all been waiting for, and in almost all of our local districts, this is what we have for our students, at least for some days of the week, and for many students every day of the week, which is terrific. It's what we school folks have been waiting for and excited for and planning for. There's still a lot of planning going on and replanning. My disclaimer is not a legal one, but just to let you know that that what I'm going to talk about are basically generalizations taken from my own experience, as well as based on what I know of other local districts, which may or may not include the district that you live in and where your child goes to school. But I'm just trying to give kind of a general overview of what this back to school experience will be like for our kids and our families and our school staff. Okay. So it's been about 6 months since we left school in March. In some ways it feels like about 2 weeks, and in some ways it feels like about 2 years. But I think we all need to take a couple minutes and just acknowledge, all of the feelings that are going along with this. Everybody's anxious. Is someone going to get sick? Are we going to have to close? Are we going to have to send somebody home? Is everything going to be okay? Are our children going to remember how to learn? Where are they going to be with regard to where they're supposed to be skill-wise? Things are going to be a lot different, and and people, I think we need to give ourselves time to go through this kind of period of mourning. I mean, school is not going to look like what school looked like. And if your child loved school, they may not love it the same way. There are no hugs, there are no handshakes, there are no fist bumps or high fives. There's distance, there's, oh, don't talk too loudly because then your respiratory droplets are carrying farther and you could be infecting someone. So I think we need to be able to say to ourselves and to our children, no, school doesn't look like how it looks, but at least we have some school right now, and we're going to be working toward making it feel better and better to be there. We're going to be working with new groups of people and in different ways. I mean, we're not going to be face-to-face with the people all the time. We're going to be virtual sometimes. Our kids are going to do remote learning, whether they signed up for a full virtual program or whether they have on days and off days, whether their related service provider is in a different building and remotely providing services to them. We're going to spend a lot of time in school practicing health and safety routines and regimens. We're going to be gaining remote learning and communication skills. I know in my district, one of the biggest things to focus on at the start of this school year is we're already thinking about how in March, when we had to go fully remote, it was a debacle because we didn't have a system. There wasn't a cohesive district-wide plan for which platforms do we use, who logs on how, and what's your username and password for every different program that your child can use. So a lot of our coming back is going to be practicing with students and with parents what happens if we have to go remote again, and how are we going to stay better connected and make sure we have that all figured out just in the event that it has to happen. And then we're figuring out how do we do teaching and learning with students who have had incredibly different experiences since March. Some of them have had a really difficult time. They've not been able to connect. They've not been close to their stable food source, which is, getting breakfast and lunch at school every day and not having to worry about that. There are some students who have kind of hung out at home and not done anything. There have been some students who have done extra reports and sent them to their teachers because they're bored and they wanted to do research. Those experiences have been incredibly different, and now they're all coming together. So practicing health and safety is one of our first things that we're working on with student a lot. We have posters everywhere. I mean, every school district has posters everywhere. It's a New York State requirement talking about keeping 6 feet between students, students not touching, no one sharing supplies. So gone are the days of the bucket of crayons in the center of the table and we all sit around the table and reach in and grab our crayons and put them back. Now everybody has their own crayons on their desk. We have desks, or we have very long tables with kids sitting at either end. They're not within 6 feet of each other typically as they're sitting and working in the classroom. They're not grouped, they're not huddled up. It's not the picture that you would have in your mind of a school classroom. We're also working a lot on respiratory hygiene, wearing that mask, coughing and sneezing into your elbow, don't touch your face. Hopefully nobody has been looking at me because I do that all the time. And then I think, oh no, as soon as I say don't touch your face, I'm gonna wanna touch my face. So I just did, so there you go. And then hand washing regularly with soap and water or using hand sanitizer. We're gonna remind kids, if you're gonna take your mask off, if you're gonna put your mask on, you need to hand sanitize before you do that. So as you can imagine, this is taking up a fairly significant chunk of time for something that we didn't really focus on previously. Okay. Oh, sorry. I also, I've included, I'm going to talk about these things in general, but I have included as a handout for you, sort of an overview of what a typical day might look like for a middle schooler and a high schooler, just so you can look at, see some of the differences that you may have thought about and some that may not even have occurred to you, but but are most likely happening for your child. So, oh, wait, sorry. I'm sorry. Will you go back, Helen? Thank you. So, oh yeah, this is the remote connection piece that I was talking about earlier, that we need to make sure our students are familiar with how to log in. Our school staff are trying to make sure that families have access. We're investing in hotspots and putting them in places in the community where people can gather or even drive their cars closer to them. Giving out Chromebooks or other kinds of laptops especially for students who are going to be virtually learning, and ideally for all students. You know, and we want to make sure that families who are juggling all these responsibilities are able to communicate with us. I know in Cohoes, for example, we had a parent academy last night about how families can connect, and giving kind of a Zoom meeting of here are the things that we're using. Here's a step-by-step of how you can log in here, what you need to do there. And those are recorded and stored on the website. And I have seen similar things on the websites of many districts locally. Okay, I'm really done with that one, Helen. Okay, the next thing that we're doing is figuring out where do we start with teaching and learning? Do we start where students left off in March? Because many students, you know, were not able to really engage in a lot of learning remotely since we weren't set up for it in the spring. You know, do we start at whatever the start of the typical grade level would be? Or do we assess student skills to find out what they know and what they need? I mean, that's the ideal, but that takes more time. You know, so these are all things that we've been considering over the summer. And really our essential question is, how do we best remediate the skills that kids have lost, review and reteach skills that they're lagging in, and then introduce new skills? And I mean, that's what we want to do for everyone. We need to get to this point for all students. And if it sounds familiar, because it's a lot like compensatory education, you know, what kinds of losses have students have? What kind of things do they need more support in and not need support in? And we have a couple ways to be looking at that. The first thing that many districts will do, or among the first things that many districts will do, is some standardized group administered assessments with their students. Typically that happens with students in kindergarten through grade 8, and typically it does happen for students who are regularly assessed. Our students who are assessed with the New York State alternate assessment and our students in kindergarten through 2nd grade are more typically assessed with individualized curriculum-based measures. And we'll be talking about those more in a minute. But these standardized group administered assessments are typically aligned to the state standards, and they give you an overall big picture view of how a student is doing in ELA and math compared to other students in the same grade, or where a student typically would be at this point in their school career.
Hello everyone, my name is Ann Cuppinger and I'm with the Community Technical Assistance Center, and I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar, Resolution Focused Crisis Support Strategies for Family Peer Advocates. This is...
I don't know what that is. I can probably talk louder though. So sorry about that, everyone.
I apologize. There was someone must have accidentally got unmuted, but I found it. So you should be good now, Erin.
Okay, thank you. So so these are generally big picture results of how students are doing in ELA and math. It may be that they'll say, oh, your standard score was 100, you're exactly where you should be, or oh, your standard score was an 85, so you're in the low average range in ELA. But it doesn't give us really meaningful information with regard to where we should start with students, or what specific skills we should work on to help them get out of the the below average or low average range and back up to where we would like them to be. Sometimes with a lot of districts, for example, use the NWA MAP assessment or iReady. Those are two popular ones. And you can use those to group students for instruction. You can say, oh, they're more here and they're more here, but they don't really dig down to something that we can use on an actionable level to make a difference. Okay, can I have the next one, Helen? So something that applies much more for our students with IEPs particularly are using individualized curriculum-based measures. These are, no, thank you. These are brief, frequent probes that we do to measure a student's skills in a specific area. Typically, these are what our IEP goals are based on or look like. They might be a specific vocabulary goal or about math fluency or how many correct word sequences a student can write in a certain amount of time. We establish a baseline. We say this is typically, right now, this is where this student is. We're going to provide instruction and we want to see that score go up and up and up. And if it doesn't go up, then we say, there's something that's not working with this instruction. What can we do differently? Maybe we get more specific about something. Maybe we do things more often. Maybe we do things with more intensity. Maybe we do it individually instead of in a group. But if we monitor that instruction for a period of 6 to 10 weeks and it does not improve at the rate that we think it should, then we may consider compensatory education, I would imagine. But to me, more importantly, as a director of special programs, rather than adding something on top of what your student is doing, I would want to fix what we're doing with your student so that they are making progress in the service that they have. Now, I did also attach in your handouts, which you'll get, a sheet about progress monitoring. And I'll just want to briefly talk about that. So progress monitoring is the process of collecting small samples of student work over time to measure the amount of growth the student is making in a specific task area, which could be reading fluency, reading comprehension, math fact fluency, sorting shapes or colors, writing legibly if it's an OT. So we use probes that are consistent in the layout, the number, and the type of items, and in how much time they're given. And the reason I'm telling everyone this is so you know what we will be doing at school to determine whether your child is making progress. And if your child is still at home, if your child is on a remote or virtual plan, these are things as a caregiver that you can do to keep checking on what your child is doing. And then when you go to talk to someone at school, the CSE or your special education director or your teacher, you'll be able to say, this is what I notice. And it doesn't say, you don't say, it seems like it's not really improving. You say, well, on this day, here's how it was. And we listened to your instruction online and we did the work together and we're still at the same place. So that's really what we want to do. We want to be able to be specific and we want to be able to give data that's not just I think, but I show. Probes can be used to monitor progress academically or in OT, PT, and speech, even in social emotional goals, as long as we can specifically describe what we want your child to do more or less of, then we can say, are they doing more or less of that specific thing? So if you're interested in progress monitoring your child at home based on IEP goals, his or her special ed teacher may be able to help you create a plan. And then I just have a couple of different examples on here of areas where you could do some progress monitoring, kind of a quick and easy progress monitoring plan for your student, because really, when it comes right down to it, we want to be sure that we're giving the right kind of instruction. And if you're monitoring your child's progress, and we at school are monitoring your child's progress, and we're just not seeing growth, then that means that as long as we know that, you know, we're using the same measures over time, we know that that means something is not working with the instruction that's being given. Is it that you need it said a different way or presented a different way? Is it the content? Is it the intensity or the frequency or the group size? And those are all things that we can work on and that we can fix. I will tell you that my fear as the special education director is not, oh no, I don't want to give that child too much support. My thought is, I want to give this child and every child the right kind of support. I want to give them support that's going to help them grow toward their goals. And if we are able to do that, then we all win. And rather than layering, you know, all of the new things that are happening with all of the lessons that your child would have been learning with another bunch of different instruction after school or during the time that would have been free time at school, then that may be exhausting and not producing more benefit, because I think more is not always better. Right is better. So I want to try to get things right. So then, Helen, if we could go to the next slide. So what I would recommend for you as a CSE director in my district is to talk with your child's teacher and your child's CSE chairperson. Whatever structure your child is working in right now, how is it working for them? Are there things that are okay and are not okay? And are there ways that we could make it more productive? Then I want to know, are there some specific skills that are progressing while others are lagging? If so, is there a way to change the focus or the time allotted to some areas? Maybe your child is doing really, really well in math and is having a difficult time with reading comprehension. Is there a way to shift the time allotted so that more is going toward reading because you don't need so much in math? And I mean, we made all these recommendations a while ago when we were mid-pandemic. So it will not hurt us to review them if you're seeing some difficulties in a specific area. And can we change the current instruction to better meet your child's needs? And then finally, how's your child adjusting to the structure of the new day? Do they have stamina for additional work? Or like I said, do we need to work smarter and not better to meet your child's needs? And what would that look like if we could? And finally, I just have a few things that I feel like we all, as a community of people who want to help our children, we all need to focus on. The first is that whether you are in-person, remote, or hybrid, you're probably doing a lot more with educational technology than ever before and communication technology than ever before. Parents, students, and teachers have different levels of tech experience. Some things are not going to be smooth as we continue to navigate this, but things can be smoother when we're a little patient with each other and when we can understand, I have this urgency right now, but they also have an urgency, and I'm sure that it's unlikely that they're just being difficult because we just want to get through things and do the right things for students. The state and federal government, Department of Health and Department of Ed agree that right now the first priority is health and safety. So our job at the school district is to provide the services outlined in the IEP to the extent possible when viewed through the lens of reasonableness given the current circumstance, which again does not mean that the school district does not want to meet your child's needs, does not think of them as our children, but it does mean that the way we meet those needs might look different than how it looked previous to the pandemic. And then finally, I am convinced that all of us can work reasonably and safely together to meet the needs of all of our children. Thanks.
Thank you, Erin.
Great. So I don't know if the presenters would like to, have some conversations, or if people would like to drop questions in the chat, I can relay them to the presenters. I know early on we got a question. Someone asked, how do 504 plans fit into this situation? And that was back when Tina was presenting. So if anyone has any insight on that. I've also been requested to stop sharing the slides so we can see all of the presenters. I am going to email everyone the PowerPoint and handout materials as soon as the training is over, along with the evaluation for this training. We take your evaluations very seriously. They help us prepare for the next year's training. So you can look for that email.
Okay, I just unmuted my mic, Helen, and I pulled up the question. So I guess, Kristen, I might need your help here, but I would say, based upon information that I know, 504 does not meet the criteria for compensatory services. However, it still is protected underneath ADA, and this has never happened before a pandemic in anybody's life, so I'm not sure how that would apply here for that. I'm being honest. Can't hear you.
Kristen, you're muted. I will unmute you. Hope it's only doing ask to unmute. I think that's my fault. I think I muted you at one point, Kristen, and I forgot that your computer was not working. So give me a second. I'm gonna try and play with some things.
And so I'm just going to elaborate on that, because when I was setting up my slides and everything, 504 did come to mind, and I couldn't find anything. So that's why I'm unsure of this.
So Tina?
Yes, help me.
Well, my thought would be, and this is based on my thoughts and my knowledge of 504, my thought would be that typically a 504 plan is less about services and more about, less about continuing services and more about access. So to the degree that a student did not get access to their education because it was not formatted correctly, or, you know, some of those things might apply, but typically it's more of, you know, having test accommodations or being able to go to the nurse, or a lot of things that are helpful in the context of the school building, but not necessarily in the learning process.
And that's exactly what I thought, because it's more accommodations, modifications, but I did do some research to see if I could locate anything, and I couldn't, to the point where, like, 2 hours after digging, I said, my head hurts and I can't find anything.
Kristen, I'm not sure how to unmute. If you're able to call in from your cell phone to answer, that may be a workaround, and I can give you the phone number to call into. Thank you everyone so much for your patience. We really appreciate it. Kristen, the phone number is 929 436 2866. And do you need the meeting ID? The meeting ID is 989 7125 8906. And do you need a password? Okay, it is 461472.
This is our first one with Zoom, correct, Helen? So that people understand it's a different technology than the last time.
Yes, and I see Kristen right here. So Kristen, now hit *6, Kristen, and you should be good.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, but you have to mute your computer.
Which she can't do.
Okay, I'm going to step away from the computer, okay? Okay, I believe everybody should be able to hear me now without too much background noise.
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, so what Tina and Erin said are correct about compensatory education is traditionally when we're talking about an IEP under IDEA. It does not neatly apply to 504 plans. However, I would encourage you, if you are working with a student who has a 504 plan, to follow the same recommendations of tracking progress, tracking data the best that you can, and bringing any and all of your concerns to your students' teachers and the 504 team leader. If you're not sure who that person is, you can contact the special education department for your district, and they should be able to tell you who the appropriate person is. And you can have the same conversations with all of the same factors with that person. I think that you'll find your school district want to make sure that they are complying with 504 requirements, and hopefully are willing to listen to your concerns and work something out with you. They do usually refer more to accommodations that are provided, access issues. I do on occasion though see an overlap with some modified curriculum or items that would more traditionally be thought of something that you would see on an IEP. So if those are the types of concerns you're talking about, definitely raise them sooner or later so that you can start tracking the information, the teachers can track the information, and still address it through the 504 process.
Thank you for sharing. If anyone has any other questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Oh. I've got a question. It says, for my daughter, virtual learning has not been working and she has regressed already. Received compensatory extended school years, which she had never received before. With the regression, would we need to wait the 6 to 10 weeks?
I would say it depends on what your district has done. Many districts have established their own processes with regard to this, since the wording as it was sent out from the Department of Education was rather vague. So some districts in order to make it more easily, I would say, have established different criteria and a different system. In my mind, individualization is individualization, and I would want to look at what there was, particularly if we already have a history of regression previously.
Same thing, but I would
Yeah,
also
this is,
suggest that they start
oh,
to
go ahead.
right now and keep track of everything and write a letter to the district. Because I think you just read, Helen, that they got compensatory over the summer. I think that's what I heard you say. So they've kind of gotten some makeup services, but 6 weeks is definitely not enough for any kid to really make up stuff for a while. So I think they should chart it and write a letter to the district to say, you know, they're inquiring about this, and see if they can keep track of it. Like Erin said, it might be another 6 weeks of collecting data to really see where the areas of regression are.
This is Kristen. I generally agree with that. I think it, to some extent, depends on when that decision was made and how much data has been collected between then and now. I would not wait to raise the concern to the CSE now, so that it is something they are aware of and able to track. And then that's how long or how much more information is needed really depends on the individual circumstances, and it's something that has to be, you know, talked about between the parent and the CSE director or chair.
It does say that as a follow-up, it said they had a CSE meeting and they are refusing any additional services. Another question we have is, what about a student who has a 504 but did not do well with virtual learning and did not do the work? For example, a child with ODD and anxiety, and it is their senior year and it is a hybrid. And I'm assuming hybrid means partially in person, partially virtual.
Right. So again, we're not talking about like true compensatory education eligibility, because that falls for students who have an IEP, not 504. I would reach out to the district immediately if the virtual model isn't working for the student and that's directly related to his or her disability. Have that conversation. Unfortunately, you know, what resources are available and what the different districts can provide vary a lot right now. They still have to provide access and provide educational instruction and services. It's just a matter of feasibility for under different models and whether in-person is something that can actually be arranged for right now. So that question is not like a black and white easy answer. That really needs a deep dig into the particular facts of that circumstance.
So
Erin, do you have any ideas on that?
Yeah, I would suggest about that if your child is a senior this year, and so I assume he is, if we're calling, did it say him or am I just assuming it's a him?
It's, this is the senior year, so it does not say.
Oh, I'm sorry. We always assume that it's boys.
It is a he. They just replied back.
Okay, thank you. So, so from my perspective as the special programs person, and also from a lot of work that I do with the high school, I would suggest to you that it is in the high school's best interest, as well as your son's best interest, for him to be able to graduate this year. And while the hybrid model is either every other day or 2 days or 3 days a week, however it works in your district, and that's just how it goes. There's not a way to put some more days of in-person instruction into that model. I would say that there probably maybe a way that in conjunction with the 504 plan, we could do something like a check and connect with your child, so that there would be somebody who's a staff person at the school who may be your psychologist or their school counselor or a teacher that would be willing to do a check-in with them, like a Zoom or a Google Meet, just whether it was in the morning or in the afternoon or in the middle of the day, just how are things going, how are you doing, do you need anything from us, maybe kind of incentivize them that way and keep that connection more going.
Great, thank you. We've got another question in the chat. It looks like it's in two parts. Forgive me, the person who submitted it, if they weren't intended to go together. It says, what is the recommendation for parents who have multiply disabled children with complex medical conditions needing limited exposure to other children and adults, so that it is not recommended they attend school, nor that the services be provided in the home, because the child is unable to access technology without one-to-one assistance and the parents are working from home?
Okay, I'm going to ask some
So,
questions here if I may. I'm sorry. You said the children they have medical needs and there's multiple kids. That's what I just want to be sure what I heard, because my computer started to get a little clicky here. So there's more than one child at home and they have medical needs, so they're medically fragile.
Yes.
And they can't do any sort of online learning at all or have anybody in the home because of their medical needs and the parents working, or did I misunderstand that piece?
Yep, that sounds about right. Limited exposure to other children and adults because of the medical needs, and it's not recommended that it's hard for them to do at-home education because the child requires one-on-one assistance with the technology in order to use it, and the parents are working.
Oh, well, I mean, the medical needs, because did a doctor say that there's medical needs that they cannot attend school? The parents are saying they don't want them to attend school. With school being the way it is, some districts, and I can only speak for some, not all, and I know they're all doing different things. Some districts they're really all trying to work together. Parents and districts and administrators, everybody is really trying to work to accommodate the kids' needs. So some, which is not typical, and I'm sure you all know this, that they're doing some things where they're coming to people's homes with kids that are medically fragile. I'm not saying all kids, so I'm being very clear. Some kids who are medically fragile, unless there's a doctor's order that says the kids can't be around anybody, period, but their family. So then I don't know how compensatory services would apply to that. If we can't get them online, nobody can come into the home. How is that even technically something that we can provide, yet seeking compensatory services? So that's why, I mean, I have a ton of questions that are buzzing in my head right now, how to resolve something like this.
Yeah.
Aaron, Kristen, anything?
One thing I'll add before the presenters answer is a follow-up was, oh yes, very fragile, not medically recommended to be with others due to high risk of COVID.
Okay.
this is Kristen. I think that sounds like a fairly impossible situation. I think the best option would be to provide your medically fragile documentation to your district and talk about whether there's one individual who they could provide as like a tutoring service to that student. That way you're limiting who has contact to the student, and hopefully that person is, doing all of the required monitoring and staying away from others, socially distancing, all of that, so that the risk of bringing a COVID-19 into the home and exposing that child stays low. That to me is maybe the best workable situation. I don't know that I can think of any other off the top of my head recommendations for that.
Well, thank you guys. That was very, lots of moving parts with that question. There is another question saying, what happens if we have one-to-one para and my children cannot do remote learning? Most of the times they beat me while on. So with that being said, if I have one para, why can they not come to the home on the week we are remote?
I'll kind of take that for a second and everybody else can chime in. I actually have talked to several parents about that. Parents have aides on their IEPs, which I understand that. However, it's aides in school. It's services to be provided in school. As I read to you all before, we've all been talking, states have flexibility within reason. We're not going to be sending people into the homes to provide services. It's just not going to happen. So if you have a one-to-one aide on your IEP, when your son or daughter is in school, that aide will be there. When he or she is doing the distance learning, which is a hybrid situation, there will be no aide that's going to come to your home to sit with him or her so that they can do virtual learning. That's what I've had several parents have wanted. And unfortunately, it's not going to happen. I feel bad about saying that, but nobody's going to be coming into people's homes to provide services. I even have kids that had no technical programs, even when COVID happened, to where they weren't in school. We were looking for out-of-district placements, and they had tutoring. And they're expecting tutors to come in the home. It's not happening. Now what they're doing is tutoring online. It could be still part of a class that they're in or something like that, a group of kids, but we're not going to get aides to come into the home to be with the kids. And I feel horrible saying that. I know everybody's really needing help and support, but it's how do we figure out how to get somebody help? Kristen, Aaron?
Yeah, so I just want to clarify that my suggestion about the possibly providing something in-home with the previous question. When we're talking about medically fragile children, the standard is a little bit different. And there is a body of law around medically fragile homebound instruction services, which sounds like is really more what that situation is about than access to the virtual platform or anything like that. The current question, I think, Tina, you're right. We're not going to get in-home service provisions, and a need or a one-to-one para is a related service, and I think that there are significant funding and practical issues with that, in addition to increased health concerns. So it's I don't see it being something that New York State Education Department requires.
So Helen, would you go back to just say that question one more time?
Yes. So it says, and they also, when you guys were talking, added some follow-up comments, which I'll include when I reread it. What happens if we have one-to-one para and my children cannot do remote learning? Most of the times they beat me while on. So that being said, if I have a one para, why can they not come to the home on the week we are remote? They followed, are they out of compliance? They just won't be able to attend for the week when it is remote, especially since there are two children both who have IEPs.
So it sounds, and I'm just clarifying, it sounds as though it's a program where in this district where there's 1 week on, 1 week off for these students.
That's how it sounds, yes.
I wonder if the school would be willing to try, I mean, each student doing a half day, and then the parent would help. But, you know, so you're approximating, you're getting some instruction, not no instruction on those weeks off, but also the students are having to participate only in specific part of the day instead of the entire day. Might make it more agreeable for everybody.
Great, thank you.
Helen, I want to be, you said this person wrote her kids beat her. Am I correct? That is the word you read.
Yes, that's what it says. I'm not sure of the context, but that's what's written.
Okay, so we also have a parent who has 2 kids that are disabled. She's physically and emotionally drained because her kids are hitting her. I think that is also a separate thing that we might need to, and I would be more than willing to talk to this parent. So if you want to send her back information, we might need to get some sort of services that somebody can come and help with behaviors. They are starting to do some of that, in-home behaviorists. They're not going to spend the day there. They'll come in and help you deal with how to deal with some of the behaviors, some teaching the kids strategies and things like that, you know, because I don't want to say discipline. But that's something that we can try to support you with. But I want to be very clear, it's not going to be somebody coming and spending the days there. They do little things. So Helen, if you want to pass on my information to her, I'd be more than him or her, be more than willing to talk to them to see how we can work something out to help them.
Absolutely. I will do that. I will send them your email privately in the chat. Another question that came in, it says, forgive me if this has already been asked. If not, if the child is not receiving any live instruction, even via remote learning, is there a way one can receive that? I understand aides cannot teach, but in these desperate times, can the aides provide help remotely with pre-recorded teachers' lessons? So what this sounds like is the child, all of the instruction is pre-recorded. And they're, yes, that is correct. All of the instruction is pre-recorded. So they said they understand.
There's no feedback for the child ever?
That's on remote days. On remote days. So it's a hybrid program. When they're at home, it's all pre-recorded. So there's no feedback, Erin. And it says they understand aides cannot teach, but could they help remotely with pre-recorded teacher lessons? So sounds like giving some feedback to the students.
It's Tina. I guess the first thing that I would want to know is, because this person's saying, can aides help? Does the child have an aide on his or her IEP? Because if they don't, then that's not something that the district could provide. Many districts have eliminated a lot of aides as it is due to budget cuts and things like that. So it would be step 1 is, does the child have an aide on his or her IEP? That would be something that I'd be asking. Step 2, if he or she does not, then I would definitely try to talk to the CSE, talk to the building, and see how we can get some sort of feedback or somebody to help with some of the hybrid stuff. There's got to be a way, even if it's for like 15-minute clips here and there. It's really all in talking to people now as to what do our children need and how can we try to support each other. That's what I really have to say, because people need to have these conversations, and yeah, they're going to be uncomfortable sometimes. And you might hear, no, we can't do it, or yes, we can, but you don't know until you really start engaging in the conversations of saying, hey, how can we try to do this? Is it even possible to do that? So that's something that I would suggest with them, but I don't know of any district. I haven't heard of any district around here that's doing 1 week on and 1 week off. So I didn't know that districts were doing that around here.
Yeah.
This is Kristen. Unfortunately, you know, we are in totally uncharted territory even still, you know, as we're in a position where we're able to at least partially reopen. We don't have a lot of guidance. We don't have a body of law that's developed right now to give us clear answers to questions like this. And so it's going to come down to reasonable efforts and, you know, trying to meet the students' needs in some way. So I would encourage you to try to be creative and to keep an open line of communication with your district about what is working and what isn't working, and see if there's a way that they can address these concerns. Maybe it's not somebody who's available every day during the remote instruction. Maybe it's somebody that the child can check in with to get some clarification, whether that's the teacher or somebody else, you know, who would be just available for a service like that. Try to get creative and work something out. That way the child isn't going an entire week where they're feeling like they really can't participate or complete any of the virtual work.
I agree. I would just say, I mean, when students are in class, I always say to them, don't be embarrassed to ask a question, because, you know, if you have a question, there are probably 3 other people sitting in this class that have the question, but just don't want to raise their hand and be the one who asks it. And I think if you're the parent that says, regular learning is going great, but on this remote day, my child has difficulty when it comes to listening and completing whichever thing it is without any support, is there, you know, what ideas can we come up with? Because it may be that 3 or 4 other parents have called independently to say that, and then at that point someone at school could say, oh wait, we have at least 3 or 4 parents whose child is having this common difficulty. Let's see what we can do to address this in some way. You know, and it may not be, if you call and say, I would like this and this and this to happen, that may not be able to happen. But if you call and say, here's a difficulty that we're having, you know, is there a different way that can happen? Then maybe the school will be able to put some things together and come up with something for you.
Thank you. This next question, I'm not sure if it falls under compensatory services, but I will ask it. It says, any suggestions for parents whose children refuse to participate in remote learning so that they are not reported to CPS for educational neglect? And as I said, I'm not sure that this falls under compensatory services, but
Yeah.
if you guys have any ideas and you feel comfortable answering.
Yeah, so this is Kristen. That's a really hard situation. And to whoever asked that, you're not alone. I've heard this concern from multiple parents. I would say, and this is not a compensatory service question, but I would say keep a log of how you are trying to get your child to participate in the services. Stay in contact with your school district about why it isn't working, whether they have any ideas. Maybe the school psychologist has some ideas. Maybe the school social worker is willing to reach out to your child and try to talk with them and, you know, discover, is there something in particular about it that isn't working for them? Again, try to be creative and think outside of the box. How can you address whatever the fear or access issue is for this student? Try to put yourself in that student's shoes for a moment. And then as the parent, try to keep as much information as you can in a journal or a log about the efforts you are making to get your child to participate in his or her education.
I think great, Kristen, what you said. And I also, I would want to know, as a school person, a little bit more about what does refuse to do it mean? Does it mean like won't approach the computer? Does it mean I don't want my picture to be on the camera where other people can see? So maybe I would listen, but not be there. Or maybe I think my voice sounds weird, so I don't want to talk on it. Or would I be willing to do the work that is coming from that, even if I don't actively participate in whatever discussion kind of things are happening? Or does it just mean work is for school, schoolwork is for school, and I don't want to work at home? You know, because those are different things. And I think at school, we could try to come up with different scenarios and solutions based on what refusal really means.
I'm just going to chime in. I agree with both of you. I would always say, what is the age of the student? And maybe there's also a thing that we might be able to get some sort of counseling to help the student understand, you know, like you just said, Aaron, maybe they don't want to see themselves. Maybe it's their voice. Somebody helping them understand to do work on the computer, how might be a suitable fit for them based upon his or her disability to be on that computer. Because like you just said, voice, face, sometimes those are triggers for some kids, being on a computer virtually.
Great. I'm gonna, there's one more question. I apologize. A dog just walked by and my dog sees it. One last question before we go, because there is another Zoom meeting scheduled immediately after this one, so we need to be off promptly at 1. This says children in special class can attend, oh gosh, sorry, another question just went in. Children in special class can attend 5 days per week. The child is in an ICT class, but goes to the special class just for math. Her ICT class goes into school Monday, Tuesday, and alternate Wednesdays. She requested to bring her into school to attend only the math class and the special class with her special class peers, and she denied. Sounds like the parent was denied. Do you have any thoughts on this? Are you able to provide any insight?
The special class is provided on the IEP.
Yes, but just for math.
And it's the math class that's not being provided. Did I understand that correctly? It was a lot of, I was just trying to follow it.
Yeah, sorry, I'm also trying to follow it. The message. The child cannot attend the math class in person when she is on remote days. And I think that's
Okay.
what the parent is requesting.
Mm-hmm. So I think it depends on what the district is offering. If she's still able to attend the special class outlined in the IEP virtually, then the district is probably meeting its obligations. If that instruction is not being provided at all, that might be an issue. And so I would call a formal CSE meeting, outline the concern in writing, ask in writing a request for the CSE to meet if it hasn't been done already, to discuss that and discuss that the parent feels like the IEP is not being implemented, and see what happens from there. There are appeal processes that can be followed. Those are outlined in the guidebook that I referenced earlier in the materials. But I always encourage parents to try to work this out, and especially during this time where, resources are limited, funding has been cut, and this is, really a situation that nobody wants to be in. I would really try to bring it back to the table and have some more detailed conversations about what can be offered.
So I would just say, from the perspective of the school district, it may be that it may have to do with what the district feels is a health and safety concern, because it may be that there are only certain kids going in on different days, and they're trying to keep the maximum number of students in the building, the maximum number of students in the classroom lower. It seems, I don't know, I'm not certain because I don't know the district or the school, but just it may be related to that, the keeping the cohorts of kids not mixing.
I can just chime in on that, Erin, because I have talked to a few districts, and there was a specific family that was trying to get their child into a specific class. And parents, of course, all talk, which that's what we do. That's fabulous. So you had, out of this class, these kids were all coming back 5 days a week. And because 2 of the kids now were out of this classroom, we're going to do remote, some parents thought that they could just get their kids still in that class. And the district said, no, if these parents decide down the line, say January, to come back, they can't just give up their spots to somebody else. Those spots need to be there. So as you just said, that could be an issue with the kids, but more so when I spoke to the principal, it actually came out that it was a combination of making sure that they had those spots for the other kids in case they came back, and keeping the kids together that are together in their, I think some people are calling them like their pods. These are the kids that are here. That's what he called them. And he said, we can't gamble with COVID right now. We're trying to start out slow. They might be able to expand later on. He says, but we've got to stick with what we've got for right now. Down the line, they said maybe January, they might look at things a little differently. So that's kind of what I've heard. So
Yeah. My concern with that is it sounded like, and maybe this was the way my brain heard that information, was that she is in that same special class, meaning that same cohort of students on the days when she is attending in person, which if she's only coming in, the parent is willing to provide transportation for just that class with that same body of students that she's already interacting and exposing to during the days that she's there. That's, I feel like a different situation. Otherwise, yes, I agree, and I think that districts are allowed to make those kinds of decisions because that's what the guidance is telling our districts to do as far as keeping the same groupings of students together.
I guess we would need more detail with regards to that.
Yeah.
So figure out how to help and guide.
They said it was Kristen hit it on the head with the cohort thing. We've got, do you think you guys have time for one more question? It is long, so if need be, I can direct this person to someone's email. Because like I said, this meeting does need to end promptly at 1. It says, a student was entitled to ENL services. In the CSE meeting, they asked to have more of his ENL services delivered and pull out than push in. The ENL teacher said based on the schedule, she could do 6 push-ins in his ELA class. She said that in that way, she can help the son one-on-one because he is the only student. The parent was only able to help his son side by side for the past 4 days in his 15-to-1 ELA class. His observation is that they have 9 students and 3 teachers there at all times. He did not see the ENL teacher as doing any individual support for the son so far. He did not see it as effective to have 3 teachers in Zoom all the time. Any suggestions for them talking to their school?
Can I ask what district? I'm sorry.
I will let you know if I get a chat.
Because from my standpoint, listening to that, it's a lot of
Jason, I'm in the meeting. Hi, you mean which school district we are in?
Yes.
It's Brighton.
I have a quick question.
Meeting.
Okay, later.
Right, in school district, what county?
Monroe County.
Right. So what I would suggest is just my thing. I'm sure Erin and Kristen might have more. that's a lot of information. It's a lot of moving parts still again. It's really sitting down. And if the district so chooses to use their resources for 3 people in a Zoom meeting, which I agree, spread them out and use them appropriately. That's a whole different scenario. I don't think they need to have all 3, but that's a conversation that we need to sit down and figure out how we can maximize what your child needs. So, and that's in the Adirondacks. Monroe is up, and how they use the resources is going to look very different because it's very rural up there. So, and I do know some people up there that maybe we could talk and I could help in that way.
Okay. So I need to contact you or email you after this, or?
No, what Helen can do is Helen can turn around and send you my contact information and you can email me and we can connect.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the help.
So Kristen and Aaron, I don't know if you guys have any comments on it.
No, thank you, Tina, for having your information sent to her. That is a very specialized and way too fact-specific question. I think that you need to sit down and talk with an advocate who can really work through your particular situation with you.
Right. Okay, I don't mind doing it.
Awesome.
It probably won't be right away, I'm gonna be honest, so, because school has started and my voicemail is full.
Great.
So,
Well, thank you all so much for attending today's training. This was really great. I'm going to, as I mentioned, send around an evaluation. Please, please, please fill them out if you can. We really take your feedback very seriously. And I will send around a recording of this training to everyone who is registered, along with the PowerPoint and handouts that Aaron referenced. If you have any questions, you have my email address already because I sent you the call-in information. So let me know. Thank you all so much.
Thank you all so much for attending.
Bye.
bye-bye.
Thank you, Helen.
Bye.
Thanks, Helen.